Hey everybody, welcome to lesson 5, and today we're going to be going over conditional statements. So let's get started. Now, first of all, what are conditional statements? They help a program make decisions on what to do. We often want our program to behave differently according to certain conditions. An example in real life would be the weather. For instance, if it's sunny outside, you wear shorts. If it's cold, you would wear jeans. The weather is variable, and you select your clothes depending on it. So a program would behave in a similar way. So let's go over if statements first. The syntax I have provided here. So we have if, and then we state a condition in parentheses. Now, if this condition is true, then we execute whatever code is in the braces here. So the condition could be something like comparison or simply a Boolean. If the Boolean value was true, then this would be executed. And then anything after the if statement will be executed anyways. So let's go to replit.com and do one example or two to test this for ourselves. So go ahead and create a new program. Make sure you use the Java template, and we will title this lesson 5. And then we'll create it. Okay, now, so let's set up a program by importing the scanner and creating a scanner object since we'll be needing to read input in. So I'm going to create an integer called n, and I will read in a value for it using the nextInt method. Now, let's say if n is greater than 5, so here you can see our condition is n greater than 5. This is our if statement. Then within the braces, we want to do something. So I'll just print out your number is greater than 5. Now let's add a print statement outside of our if statement. And this will be executed whether or not n is greater than 5. Let's print out goodbye. Okay, and now let us run this. So let's say n is 6. So what do we get? For our output, we get your number is greater than 5 and goodbye. Now let's try it again, where n is less than or equal to 5. Let's say n equals 5. Then what do we get? We only get the statement goodbye. Since n is 5, it does not satisfy this condition here on line 8, and we don't print out your number is greater than 5. Only line 12, goodbye. And finally, let's just try a small number, like n equals 4. Same thing. 4 does not satisfy this condition, so the only output we get is goodbye. Okay. Now, another conditional statement that we have is the if-else statement. So this is the syntax. First, we have an if statement, and we have a condition in parentheses. Once again, the code between the braces is only executed if this condition evaluates to true. And then we have an else statement. And within the braces, this code is only executed if our condition evaluates to false. And any code after the if-else statement will be executed anyways. So let's go to Replit and let's do a quick example. So let's say that I have an integer variable called age. Okay, and then I read it in from the scanner. And here, let's say with this integer age, I want to check whether I am of voting age or not, which is 18. Okay, so first let's check if the age we read in is an appropriate voting age. So if this age is greater than or equal to 18, this is our condition, braces, and then what do we do? If the age is greater than or equal to 18, we can tell the user you can vote. Now, what if the age is not greater than or equal to 18? What if it is less than 18? Then let's write an else statement. In this else statement, we'll print out you cannot vote. All right, then outside our if-else statement, we can tell the user, thanks for checking. And let me add a prompt for the age. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, let's say my age is 18. So what do we get for our output? For our first line, we get you can vote, which is correct. This is line 10, since 18 is greater than or equal to 18. And then we get thanks for checking, which is outside the if-else statement, line 15. And this gets executed whether or not age satisfies these conditions. Let's try another number for age. Let's say my age is 15. Then what do I get? For our output, we have in our first line, you cannot vote. And why is that? 15 does not satisfy the condition in line 9. It's less than 18. So we do what is in the else statement. And this would be printing out you cannot vote. And then once again, we have thanks for checking, which is printed out regardless. Okay, so now using what we just learned about if statements and if-else statements, let's write a program to determine whether a number is positive or negative. First of all, let's prompt the user for a number. And I'll create an integer called n, which I will read in the value of. Okay, so we want to check if n is positive or negative. So what can we say about a positive number? Well, we know a positive number is greater than 0, while a negative number is less than 0. So that pretty much gives us our if-else statement. So we first check if n is positive. Now, since a positive number is greater than 0, we want to check if n is greater than 0. This will be our condition. And then the code that we'll execute is printing out positive. Okay, so if n is not greater than 0, then it must be less than 0, and this is a negative number. So then we have an else statement. And n has to be negative. So let's run this. Let's say n is 6. And for output, we get positive. Now let's try inputting a negative number. N is negative 6. And our output, we get negative. Okay, let's talk about one final type of conditional statements. And this is the if, else statement. So here's the syntax. We first have an if statement, and there's a condition. Once again, within the braces, we have some sort of code, and it only executes if this condition evaluates to true. And you'll notice that we also have an else statement at the bottom here. But sandwiched in between them is an else if statement. And this else if statement has a totally different condition from the first one. And the code within its braces are executed only if the condition evaluates to true. And we can have as many else if statements as we want in between, but we can only have one if condition and one else condition in this entire block. Then anything after the if, else statement will be executed. So let's go back to our positive, negative number program. You might have noticed that, okay, if a number is positive, if it's above 0, we'll get positive. If it's below 0, we'll get negative. But what if it is exactly 0? And we're going to fix that by adding an else if statement. So right here between our if statement and else statement, let's add an else if statement. And here we check if n is, if it's exactly equal to 0. If that is the case, we print out 0. Then let's run this. So if n is 0, there we go, we got our output, 0. Now, let's say we have a grading system that works as follows. If you get a grade that's 80 or above, you get an A. If you get a grade between 60 and 80, you get a B. A grade between 40 and 60, a C. A grade between 20 and 40 is a D. And anything below 20 is an F. So then let's write a program that determines the letter grade given a number grade. So first of all, what we want to do is read in an integer grade. So let's create a variable for that. And we can print out a prompt. Enter a grade from 0 to 100. Okay, now our if, else if, and else statements are going to come in really handy for this. So what's the first grade we should check? We know that any grade above 80 is an A. So let's first check if the grade is greater than or equal to 80. If that's the case, we get an A. Okay, now here we're going to start using else if statements. All right, so if we reach this else if statement, this means our grade is less than 80. Now, we want to check if it's between 60 and 80, and if that is the case, then our grade is a B. So our condition will be else if grade is greater than or equal to 60. And since grade already did not pass this condition where it's greater than or equal to 80, we can definitely ensure that it's less than 80 and it's greater than or equal to 60. And thus it's between 60 and 80. So then we print out the grade is a B. Okay, now there's a couple more grades for C, D, and F. So we have 40 to 60 is a C, 20 to 40 is a D, and 20 minus is an F. Take a few seconds yourself to try and complete the program. Okay, were you able to do it? Let's go over this together. So now we want to check if our grade is a C, and our grade is a C if it is between 40 and 60. So now we check if grade is greater than or equal to 40. And then we want to check if it's a D, which is between 20 and 40. So our condition will be grade greater than or equal to 20. All right, finally, if our grade is below 20, it is an F. At this point, we don't need to check any other conditions because if the grade is not greater than or equal to 20 or 40 or 60 or 80, it must be below 20. So we just have a final else statement where we print out your grade is AF. So now let's run this. Now I'll test any random number from 0 to 100. So let's say 67. Based on the grading scale we have, we should expect a B. And here is our output. The grade is a B, which is correct. Let's go with something higher, like 90. And here we get your grade is an A. Now, what if I input a number that's out of the range from 0 to 100? So what if I have 120? I still get your grade is an A. And what if I input, for example, a negative grade? Like -20. We get your grade is an F. Well, we don't exactly want our program to do this. So how about when we're reading in the input, we check if it is valid on line 7, int grade. And we can do this by writing another if statement. So what do we want to do here? We want to check if the grade is not in the range of 0 to 100. So this means it's either above 100 or it's less than 0. And when we want to say or, we use these double lines. So if the grade is greater than 100 or the grade is less than 0, we can print out a message saying this grade is not valid. And then let's prompt the user again. Enter a valid grade from 0 to 100. And then we read in the value of grade once again. So let's run this now. Let's say I enter a negative number like -9. As you can see here, we get the error message saying this grade is not valid. And then enter valid grade from 0 to 100. So let's say 78. And we get the output, your grade is a B. Now let's try something. Say I enter an invalid grade the first time, 101, then I enter an invalid grade again, -20. Then we get your grade is AF. And this is not a valid grade at all. So what if I want to keep sending out error messages and prompts to get a valid grade? Then we can change line 9 to a while loop. And what will this do? So this will be saying while the grade is greater than 100 or less than 0, we print out an error message and then ask for a new grade. And once the grade is between 0 and 100, this while loop will terminate, and then all this if statement block will run. So let's rerun this. Okay, so 2 invalid grades in a row, and I have 2 error messages in a row. And I can keep doing this. I can enter the most bizarre grades, and I'll still keep getting these error messages. But once I enter a valid grade, like 50, then I get my output. Your grade is a C. Okay, that was pretty cool. We combined while loops from last class as well as conditionals from this class. Now, let's write a program that, given three numbers, determines the largest one. So let's first create three integer variables to store these numbers. So I will call them A, B, and C. Then we want to prompt the user for three numbers. We read in a value for each of our variables. Okay, so now let's think about how we would do this. Well, it would be a lot easier if we just had two numbers. If we had two numbers, we could just write something like this. So say our two numbers are A and B. If A is greater than B, we can say that A is greater than B. Then an else statement. If A is not greater than B, it must be the other way around. B is greater than A. That's how we would do it if we had two numbers. But in this case, we have three numbers. So let's think about how we can compare them. And we can do all of this simply using while loops. We don't need, not while loops, while using if statements. We don't have to do anything fancy, but let's think. So let's say I have the numbers 1, 2, and 3 for simplicity's sake. Now, here we know that 3 is the greatest number. And since 3 is the greatest number, what can we say about it? We can form these statements. We know that 3 is greater than 2. And by the way, in Java, when we want to say and, we use these two signs. So we can say that 3 is greater than 2 and 3 is greater than 1, right? Since it's the greatest number. Now, let's just say we have the variables A, B, and C. Pretend that A is the greatest. Now, what statements can we form? Well, since A is the greatest, it obviously must be greater than B. And it obviously must be greater than C, right? Then what if B is the greatest? Well, we can say that B would be greater than A, and B would be greater than C, correct? And finally, if C were the greatest, we can say that C is greater than A, and C is greater than B. Okay, so now these sets of statements exactly give us our if statements. This makes it a lot easier. So all we have to do is implement it in terms of Java. So let's first check if A is the greatest. Now, if A is the greatest, this means that A is greater than B, and A is greater than C. If that's the case, we say that A is the greatest. Now, if A is not the greatest, then let's check if B is the greatest. We use the else if statement here. And if B is the greatest, B is greater than A, and B is greater than C. Then we print out B is the greatest. Finally, we checked if A is the greatest or B is the greatest. If both of those conditions are not satisfied, this means that C is the greatest. So we don't need an else if statement here. We just use the else statement because it's guaranteed that C must be the greatest. And there we go. We've written the program to determine the greatest number. Very simple. So let's run this now and test it. Let's use my example, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we get the correct output. 3 is the greatest. And now let's just try any 3 random numbers. For example, okay, our output, we get this large number is the greatest, and by checking yourself, you can evidently tell that as well. Now, what if we want to expand this further and print these numbers out from greatest to least? Well, we can continue using if statements to do this. And now we're going to start using something called nested if statements. So recall that we covered nested for loops a couple classes back, and that was a for loop within a for loop. Here it's a similar thing. It's just an if statement within an if statement. So let's start with our first if statement, where A is the greatest. Okay, we already know that A must be the greatest number. But now we want to know if B or C is the second greatest. Then we can print out the second greatest and then the smallest. So within our if statement, let's write another one. But the first thing we can do is just print out A. And add a space because the next number we'll be printing out is the second greatest and we want a space in between so we can differentiate them. So A is the greatest one. Now we want to check if B or C is the second greatest. So we compare the two. If B is greater than C, then it must be the second greatest number. Then we can print B out. Okay, and if B is not greater than C, this must mean that C is greater than B, and C is therefore the second greatest. So we just write an else statement. It's guaranteed. Okay, so in this if block, we have printed out the second greatest number. Now we want to print out the smallest, and we know the smallest has to be either B or C. So we do a separate comparison. If B is less than C, then we would print B out. That would mean B is our smallest number. Else, C must be the smaller one. and we print out C. Now, you might notice that this is actually not necessary at all, because let's look at our first if log. If B is greater than C, we already established that B is the second greatest, then C must be the smallest, right? So instead, we can print out C once we've confirmed that B is greater than C. Else, C is the second greatest, so B must be the smallest. And you'll find that lines 20 to 24 are really not necessary at all. Now, let's try a similar thing with the cases where B is the greatest and C is the greatest. Take a few seconds to try it on your own, and then we'll go over it together. Okay, now let's do this together. So we can first print out the greatest number, which we already know is B. So the other two numbers we have left to compare are A and C. Now, if A is greater than C, this means A is the second greatest and C is the smallest. Else, C is less than A, else C is greater than A, so C is the second greatest and A is the smallest. Finally, in the case where C is the greatest, we just have to compare A and B. So first we print out C. Now, if A is greater than B, this means A is the second greatest, while B is the smallest. Else, B has to be greater than A. This means B is the second greatest, while A is the smallest. And there we go, we've done it. We've used nested if statements, and we've used an if, else statement. We combine all of them together to create this program, which is pretty amazing. So let's run this. Once again, I'll use my example 1, 2, 3 first. And we get the numbers from in descending order, 3, 2, 1. Let's try another random 3. In descending order, this is correct. Now, let me tell you one more way that we can shorten these if statements. So you'll notice that with if statements, it looks a bit hard to read with so many nested if statements. So we can write these as separate if, and else statements. So here at line 14, this is the case where we have A is greater than B or B is greater than C. We can add another and say this. If A is greater than B and A is greater than C and B is greater than C, we print out this order. And let's write an else if statement. Here we write the case where A is greater than C, which is greater than B. And we would have if A is greater than B and A is greater than C and C is greater than B, we print it out in this order. Okay, and you can keep repeating this for the remaining 4 statements. I'll do this really quickly, and you can follow along or check your work. Okay, so now I have if statements for all 6 cases. As you can see, I've commented them, and you can also add them as well. So let's run this program. And you'll notice that this looks a lot more readable than before, right? And our output is still correct. Okay, great job. Now let's recap this lesson. In this lesson, we covered conditional statements, which included if statements, if else statements, if else statements. So thank you so much for watching this lesson, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.